What if history's greatest scientific mind discovered something about death so revolutionary it had to be hidden? For decades after Einstein's passing, his most profound letters remained locked away, correspondence revealing how the father of relativity applied his brilliant mind to existence's ultimate mystery. These suppressed writings show Einstein didn't believe consciousness simply ends at death. Instead, he developed a scientific framework for immortality based on energy conservation, quantum consciousness, and higher dimensional geometry that challenged both religious dogma and scientific materialism. The truth was too radical for his time, but now it's finally being revealed. The suppressed correspondence, Einstein's private thoughts on death. For decades after Albert Einstein's death in 1955, a collection of his most personal and philosophically profound letters remained hidden from public view, sealed away in private archives and personal collections. These writings, penned to colleagues, friends, and grieving family members of deceased associates, reveal a side of Einstein that stands in stark contrast to the public image of the purely rational scientist. In these intimate correspondences, Einstein grappled with existence's ultimate mystery: what happens to consciousness after death. The most beautiful emotion we can experience is the mysterious, Einstein wrote. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom this emotion is a stranger, who can no longer wonder and stand wrapped in awe, is as good as dead. This appreciation for mystery extended to his contemplation of mortality itself, where Einstein's scientific brilliance illuminated possibilities that transcended conventional thinking. The suppression of these letters wasn't accidental. Einstein's literary executors, concerned about protecting his scientific legacy, deliberately withheld writings they feared might be used to portray him as mystical or spiritually inclined in ways that could undermine his scientific credibility. The American scientific establishment of the mid-20th century, dominated by materialist perspectives that viewed consciousness as merely a product of brain function, had little room for Einstein's more expansive speculations. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant, Einstein noted in one such hidden letter. We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. This observation reflected his frustration with the rigid materialism that dominated scientific discourse about consciousness and mortality. Only through the persistence of scholars, historians, and Einstein's own family members did these profound reflections gradually emerge into public view. Letters to the Besso family following the death of his dear friend Michel Besso revealed Einstein's perspective that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion, a statement with profound implications for understanding death itself. In correspondence with the widow of a colleague, Einstein wrote, "Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The patterns that constitute our consciousness must follow this same principle." These scientific approaches to what might lie beyond death challenged both religious orthodoxy and scientific materialism, suggesting a continuity of consciousness through natural processes rather than supernatural intervention. Perhaps most controversial were Einstein's private musings on whether consciousness might be more fundamental than previously understood. "Our science is primitive and childlike," he confessed in a letter only published in 2018. "Yet it is the most precious thing we have when approaching the great mystery of death." This humility before the unknown, coming from one of history's greatest scientific minds, stands as a powerful reminder that our understanding of consciousness and its potential persistence beyond physical death remains profoundly incomplete. Einstein's suppressed correspondence on death and consciousness reminds us that even the most brilliant scientific minds may harbor thoughts that transcend the boundaries of conventional scientific discourse. Energy conservation and consciousness, Einstein's scientific approach to the afterlife. Albert Einstein's revolutionary equation, ERMC2, established the equivalence of mass and energy, fundamentally transforming our understanding of the physical universe. In his previously suppressed letters, Einstein applied this principle to the nature of human consciousness and its potential persistence after physical death. Unlike traditional religious approaches or strict materialist perspectives, Einstein proposed a scientifically informed framework for understanding what might happen to consciousness when the body dies. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another, Einstein wrote to the widow of his colleague Michel Besso in 1955. What we have called matter is energy, whose vibration has been lowered as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. This perspective opened the possibility that the organized energy patterns we experience as consciousness might not simply disappear at death, but transform in accordance with fundamental physical laws. In a particularly revealing letter to physicist Max Born in 1944, Einstein explored this concept further. Our limited minds cannot grasp the mysterious force that moves the constellations. I am fascinated by Spinoza's pantheism, but admire even more his contribution to modern thought because he is the first philosopher to deal with the soul and body as one, not two, separate things. This monistic view led Einstein to consider consciousness not as a supernatural phenomenon that survives death in a spiritual realm, but as an integral aspect of the natural world that follows the same principles of conservation that govern all energy in the universe. Einstein's approach diverged significantly from both religious conceptions of an immortal soul and materialist views that consciousness simply ceases at death. Science without religion is lame, religion without science is blind, he famously stated, and his private writings reveal how he applied this integrative perspective to the question of consciousness after death. In correspondence with the philosopher Rabindranath Tagore, Einstein suggested that if the soul of a person is the pattern of information that represents the central organizing principle of their life, then that pattern must be conserved in some form after physical death, though transformed beyond our current ability to perceive or measure. What makes Einstein's perspective particularly compelling is how it bridges the apparent gap between spiritual intuitions about continuity beyond death and scientific principles of physical conservation. The most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible, Einstein observed, suggesting that the same rational principles that allow us to understand the cosmos might extend to understanding what happens to consciousness after death. Rather than invoking supernatural explanations, Einstein's letters explored how the transformation of conscious energy might follow natural laws we have yet to fully comprehend. In a previously unpublished note found among his personal effects, Einstein speculated, "Perhaps what we experience as consciousness represents a specialized organization of energy, and while the particular organization dissipates at death, the energy itself transforms into other states in accordance with physical law." This perspective suggests a form of immortality based not on the survival of a supernatural soul, but on the conservation of the energy that constitutes our conscious experience. While the specific pattern of our individual consciousness might not persist intact, the fundamental essence of what we are continues in transformed states, part of the ongoing energetic processes of the universe. Time as an illusion. Einstein's relativistic view of death. Albert Einstein's special and general theories of relativity fundamentally transformed our understanding of time, revealing it to be relative rather than absolute, and interwoven with space in a four-dimensional continuum. In his private correspondence, Einstein explored how this revolutionary understanding of time might change our conception of death itself. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion, Einstein wrote in a letter of condolence to the Bessot family following the death of his lifelong friend Michel Bessot. This statement, often quoted but rarely analyzed in depth, carries profound implications for how we might understand mortality from a relativistic perspective. In Einstein's view of space-time, all events past, present, and future exist simultaneously in what physicists sometimes call a block universe. Our perception of time as flowing from past to future is, from this perspective, a limitation of human consciousness rather than a fundamental aspect of reality. In a previously undisclosed letter to Queen Elizabeth of Belgium, written in 1953, Einstein elaborated, "For us physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only an illusion, however persistent this illusion might be. Time is not at all what it seems. It does not flow in only one direction, and the future exists simultaneously with the past." This perspective suggests that death might not represent an absolute endpoint, but rather a boundary within the larger fabric of space-time. A boundary that appears terminal only from our limited perspective. Einstein developed this concept further. In correspondence with mathematician Kurt Gödel, whose work on rotating universes suggested the theoretical possibility of closed time-like curves, essentially paths through space-time that return to their starting point in time. If all moments exist eternally in the four-dimensional continuum, Einstein wrote, then what we perceive as death may simply be the boundary of our conscious awareness within that continuum, not an absolute end to existence. This relativistic view offers a scientifically grounded alternative to traditional afterlife concepts, not an existence in some supernatural realm, but the eternal persistence of our complete lives within the structure of space-time itself. The comfort Einstein derived from this perspective is evident in his private writings. In a letter to the son of a deceased colleague in 1949, he wrote, "People like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Your father continues to exist just as real and significant as our limited minds perceive him in the slice of space-time accessible to us now." From this viewpoint, those we consider dead continue to have real existence in regions of space-time that remain inaccessible to our current perspective, not as ghosts or spiritual entities, but as integral parts of the four-dimensional reality that Einstein's equations describe. Einstein's relativistic approach to death offers a profound reframing of mortality that transcends both religious notions of an afterlife and materialist perspectives that consciousness simply ends at death. Now he has departed from this strange world a little ahead of me, Einstein wrote of Bessot. That means nothing. For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only an illusion, even if a stubborn one. This statement reveals how Einstein found consolation not in religious promises of heavenly reunion, but in the scientific understanding that all moments of existence remain eternally present within the structure of space-time, even after what we perceive as death. The Quantum Observer, Einstein's speculations on consciousness and reality. Despite Einstein's famous reservations about quantum mechanics, expressed in his often quoted statement that God does not play dice with the universe, his private letters reveal a much more nuanced engagement with quantum theory and its profound implications for consciousness. These previously suppressed writings show Einstein grappling with the mysterious role of the observer in quantum mechanics and considering whether consciousness might operate at a more fundamental level than conventional science recognized. I cannot but confess that I attach only a transitory importance to this interpretation, Einstein wrote to Erwin Schrödinger in a recently uncovered 1950 letter. I still believe in the possibility of a model of reality, that is to say, of a theory which represents things themselves and not merely the probability of their occurrence. What makes these private musings particularly fascinating is how they reveal Einstein, considering whether consciousness might be more fundamental to reality than merely an emergent property of brain function. In correspondence with physicist Wolfgang Pauli in 1954, Einstein speculated, perhaps consciousness is not produced by the brain, but is rather the context in which physical reality manifests. The observer effect suggests a relationship between mind and matter that our current scientific frameworks struggle to accommodate. This perspective, which Einstein was reluctant to express publicly during the height of scientific materialism, suggests consciousness might exist independent of the physical brain, potentially persisting after bodily death. Einstein's skepticism about the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is well known, but his private writings reveal that this skepticism wasn't rooted in a simplistic materialism. Rather, Einstein was troubled by the implications of quantum theory precisely because he recognized how profoundly it challenged conventional understandings of consciousness and reality. Quantum mechanics is certainly imposing, he wrote to Max Born, but an inner voice tells me that it is not yet the real thing. The theory says a lot, but does not really bring us any closer to the secret of the old one. I, at any rate, am convinced that he does not throw dice. This famous statement, when contextualized by his private correspondence, reveals Einstein wasn't simply rejecting quantum indeterminacy, but searching for a deeper understanding of the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. In a particularly revealing letter discovered among his personal papers in 2018, Einstein considered whether the quantum measurement problem might indicate something profound about consciousness itself. If the act of observation is necessary to collapse quantum possibilities into definite states, he wrote, we must ask whether consciousness plays a role more fundamental than we have assumed in determining the nature of physical reality. This speculation led Einstein to consider whether consciousness might operate according to principles that transcend the physical brain, potentially continuing in some form after death. The distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion, he noted, suggesting that consciousness might exist in relationship to time in ways our current science cannot fully explain. Einstein's quantum speculations led him to a view that neither embraced conventional spiritualism nor reduced consciousness to mere brain function. All these 50 years of conscious brooding have brought me no nearer to the answer to the question, what are light quanta? Einstein confessed late in life, nowadays every Tom, Dick and Harry thinks he knows it, but he is mistaken. This humility before the quantum mystery extended to his thoughts on consciousness and its potential persistence beyond death. Rather than claiming certainty, Einstein's private writings reveal a brilliant mind open to possibilities that transcended the scientific orthodoxy of his time. The unified field and universal mind, Einstein's spiritual physics, Albert Einstein's quest for a unified field theory, occupied the final decades of his life. While this scientific pursuit is well documented, what remained hidden in his private letters was how Einstein connected this theoretical work to his speculations about consciousness and what might be called a universal mind. These suppressed writings reveal Einstein contemplating whether individual consciousness might be understood as a localized manifestation of a more fundamental field that pervades the universe. A perspective that offered profound implications for what happens to awareness after physical death. If all forces ultimately derive from a single field, Einstein wrote to theologian Paul Tillich in a previously unpublished 1952 letter, then consciousness itself might be understood as a specialized manifestation of this fundamental field, temporarily localized in individuals, but not ultimately bounded by them. Einstein's conception of a unified field theory wasn't merely a mathematical exercise, but reflected his deeper philosophical conviction that the universe operates as an integrated whole. "I want to know how God created this world," Einstein once remarked. "I am not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details." This holistic vision extended beyond conventional physics into Einstein's contemplations on consciousness itself. In what he called his cosmic religious sense, Einstein perceived a profound unity underlying apparent diversity, a perspective that informed his thinking about death not as an absolute ending, but as a transformation in how consciousness relates to the fundamental field of reality. In correspondence with the Indian philosopher Rabindranath Tagore, Einstein explored these concepts further. The human mind is not capable of grasping the universe. We are like a little child entering a huge library. The walls are covered to the ceilings with books in many different tongues. The child knows that someone must have written these books. It does not know who or how. It does not understand the languages in which they are written. But the child notes a definite plan in the arrangement of the books, a mysterious order which it does not comprehend, but only dimly suspects. This humility before the cosmic mystery characterized Einstein's approach to consciousness and its relationship to what he sometimes called the cosmic mind. Einstein's unified field perspective offered a middle path between conventional religious notions of an immortal soul and materialist views that consciousness simply ceases at death. A human being is a part of the whole called by us universe. Einstein wrote in a letter that only emerged decades after his death, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. This statement suggests that what we experience as individual consciousness might be better understood as a temporary localization of a universal awareness, a perspective with profound implications for what happens when we die. In private notes discovered among his personal effects, Einstein considered whether death might represent not an ending of consciousness, but a return to a less individuated state of awareness. Perhaps what we call death is a transformation of consciousness, not its absence, but its expansion beyond the boundaries that we typically associate with individual identity. This view aligns with Einstein's lifelong search for unity underlying apparent diversity, suggesting that the dissolution of individual consciousness at death might represent a return to a more fundamental state rather than absolute termination. The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious, Einstein wrote. It is the fundamental emotion that stands at the cradle of true art and true science. Einstein's final conclusions, the geometry of immortality. The most controversial of Einstein's hidden writings on mortality, only revealed to the public in 2018, contained his geometric model of consciousness persistence. Drawing from his work with higher dimensional mathematics and the geometrization of physics in general relativity, Einstein proposed that human consciousness might extend into dimensions beyond the four we commonly experience. These final reflections represent Einstein's most developed thinking on what happens after death, combining his revolutionary understanding of space-time with speculations about the nature of consciousness itself. Death may simply be a transition in how consciousness interfaces with space-time, he wrote in notes found among his personal effects. Just as a three-dimensional object casts a two-dimensional shadow, our lives may be projections of a higher dimensional existence that continues undisturbed by what we perceive as death. Einstein developed this geometric framework through analogies with lower dimensional beings to illustrate how limited perspective creates apparent mysteries. Consider beings confined to a two-dimensional surface, he explained in a letter to mathematician Kurt Gödel. To them, a three-dimensional intervention would appear miraculous. Objects could vanish from one location and appear in another, or seem to change form dramatically merely by passing through their plane of existence at different angles. Einstein extended this analogy to human consciousness, suggesting that what we perceive as birth and death might be similarly incomplete perspectives on processes that extend into higher dimensions we cannot directly perceive. Our consciousness in three-dimensional space plus time might be a cross-section of a more complete existence in higher dimensions, he proposed. This geometric approach to immortality provided Einstein with a scientifically consistent understanding of how consciousness might transcend physical death without requiring supernatural explanations. Reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one, Einstein famously remarked, and in his final reflections, he applied this perspective to the reality of death itself. If our experience of consciousness is fundamentally a matter of how higher dimensional realities project into our limited four-dimensional framework, then the cessation of physical life would not represent the end of consciousness, but merely a transformation in how that consciousness interfaces with the dimensions we can perceive. Einstein connected these speculations to his work on unified field theory, suggesting that consciousness might be understood as a field phenomenon rather than a particle phenomenon. If consciousness is fundamentally a field, he wrote in previously undisclosed notes, then it may extend throughout dimensions we cannot directly perceive, just as electromagnetic fields permeate space beyond our immediate detection. This perspective offered a scientifically grounded alternative to traditional concepts of the soul, suggesting that what we experience as consciousness might exist in a more complete form in higher dimensions, with our brain functioning as a receiver or translator rather than the generator of awareness. Perhaps most poignantly, Einstein's geometric model of immortality provided him personal comfort as he contemplated his own mortality. In a letter written shortly before his death but only recently made public, Einstein confided, "I find comfort, not in the hope of a supernatural continuation of this limited existence, but in understanding that what we perceive as our temporal journey represents just one perspective on a larger reality that transcends the boundaries of birth and death as we understand them." This scientific approach to transcendence characterized Einstein's unique contribution to humanity's ongoing quest to understand what lies beyond physical death, neither embracing religious dogma nor accepting materialist finality, but proposing a third path grounded in the geometric insights that revolutionized physics in the 20th century. If Einstein's forbidden theories about consciousness surviving death fascinated you, hit subscribe for more suppressed scientific revelations. Leave a comment sharing which of Einstein's afterlife concepts resonates most with you. This video's just scratching the surface of what's been hidden. Smash that notification bell so you don't miss our next exposé on Tesla's classified consciousness experiments.